So I'm resolved in teaching myself visual literacy, and one of the ways that I practice that is by creating digital collages. And what better way to both describe how digital collage informs my practice of visual literacy than to show you a collage about collages and visual literacy. Here she is. So first of all, what I like about this is that at first glance, especially, I assume, from someone who hasn't seen it before, it looks quite cluttered. It's maybe overwhelming, but more so it's stimulating. It's rich with information. And that's the first reason that I like making these digital collages, is because I use them as a form of, let me get in here. Let me get in the shot. I use them as a form of harm reduction because, like many people, I'm trying to cut down on the amount of doom scrolling, social media, Pinterest and Instagram specifically. And I found digital collage to be an amazing foil to that, because it has these elements of creativity, of using your brain and your tastes and your desires to create little stories. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. First of all, visual literacy. So I understand visual literacy as a way of reading between the lines. It is an invisible language. Sometimes I think a subconscious language, but more so than not, it is a language that whoever is using it is able to use the language to communicate certain ideas and tap into the subconscious. It's based a lot around cultural symbols and our understanding of those cultural symbols. There's an amazing video by Seema from Art Lust where she talks about this Botticelli painting in particular. There's always going to be cultural significance for different colors. And it's in my best interest to try to understand what that significance is that we put on that, because in turn it affects and influences a lot of the art that people create, whether they're trying to or not. Having advanced visual literacy is also, I think, about understanding that your eye will travel to certain places in the image based upon composition and color and that sort of thing. And I think it's about letting yourself do that, like letting the eye travel where it wants to travel, but then simultaneously kind of having an understanding of why it's doing that and why it's directing you that way psychologically. And in that way, where visual literacy is an understanding of the history of icons and colors and a bit about psychology, the reasons why certain colors make us react a certain way, why certain compositions make us react a certain way. Because it involves all these things, I see visual literacy as a junction where your personal knowledge really informs how you interpret an image or understand a piece of art. It's the meeting of your understanding of psychology, history, art, anthropology, mathematics. And the reason that for me, I think it's particularly pertinent that I want to hone my skills in visual literacy is because I have these ghosts. Like, I'm very haunted by the art that I see and the media that I see. I know that it is igniting something in me and making me feel a certain way, but sometimes there's a disconnect and I feel like I have to be told why it's making me feel that way. Sometimes it's difficult for me to come to my own conclusions. And I really want to start connecting those ideas and making these connections on my own, in my own words. That's really important to me, because it's not enough just to watch something like Tar or something like Dogville and know that it's doing something significant to me and it's drawing something out of me and making me think in a new way, or that this piece of art is a conduit for an emotion in me that either wasn't there before, so it's literally creating an emotion in me, or it's giving me a space to explore an emotion that I was already feeling. I don't know the difference, but I believe that having more specific and more informed and sharper visual literacy will help a lot in taking pieces of art that make me feel incredible things and being able to peel back the layers and understand how it got to this point, why it's making me feel that way, and coming to my own conclusions about that is very important to me. And this doesn't just apply to, more somber movies. This is an example in The Mood for Love, because I think it is quite somber, but something like the movie Trainwreck with Tilda Swinton in it, no other movie that I've watched so far has created such a feeling of discomfort. It was a really uncomfortable movie to experience. I don't think cringe is quite the right word for what I was feeling, but it was something singular and something that I don't think a movie has made me feel since or has made me feel before watching that movie. And I don't think it was intentional. And if it was, I'm really curious as to why they wanted to make me feel uncomfortable during like a comedy movie, or a comedy movie that I do feel, makes me laugh harder than any other comedy movie. I'm interested in the mechanics there. What specifically about this writing or this framing or these performances make me absolutely chortle? I want to get into the minutia. Also, shout out to this comedy set presentation by a man, I think his name is Pierce, and it's called Frog Unlocked. And it's a great inspiration for me because it is truly how I feel about these digital collages where you're sort of mashing up a bunch of ideas next to each other and finding the connections, sometimes forcing the connections between two different images, I think is really fun. So shout out to that. Where should I go from here? Yes, so understanding where the eye travels. I think that visual literacy is a lot about looking closer, or in some cases, taking a step back. And that takes time. So it is about sitting with something and parsing out how you feel about it, why you might feel that way. This piece is by a Spanish artist named Lorenzo Duran, and I love it because it makes me very curious. I want to know how long this took. I want to know the significance of this design in particular, if it is influenced by his Spanish heritage, if it's something he saw, maybe it almost looks Nordic to me, or Celtic even. Yeah, Celtic. It looks Celtic. But I don't know. It makes me interested. I also am so tickled by how almost silly it comes across to me, because this just seems like a lot of effort for a leaf, but that's inspiring because it makes me want to take my time and be a little bit, frivolous is not the right word, but have so much intentionality around something that might come across as kind of silly or kind of banal or kind of not worth the time, I think is really cool and something that I want to practice myself. And something that I'd love to make something that brings that same thought out of somebody else. Like, wow, who took the time to do this? Cool. Yeah. And that's another reason why I'd want to become quite visually literate, is because I selfishly want to use these same techniques, this same secret language in my own work, in the things that I'm working on. I want to have access to that language. I watched a video with Martin Scorsese where he was talking about visual literacy in particular when it comes to film. And that's where I got the idea of the secret language, the hidden language, where you have to sit with something and be curious about it and want to know the mechanics behind it. He was specifically talking about lenses and lighting techniques and that sort of thing. But I think it applies to many mediums. Yes. Okay. Connecting ideas. I became obsessed with the idea of connecting my own ideas, and also a hunch that somewhere in the last 10 years, my ideas became very fragmented. And I became obsessed with the idea of connecting them when I started using Obsidian to keep all my writing in one place. Even if it's something as routine as a to-do list, it can still live in the same place as some script I want to work on, or some thought piece that I'm really curious about, something research-based. in some way can have a connection to my regular to-do list. And that's a really exciting prospect for me. My obsidian is still a little bit sparse. There's not as many connections yet, but she's a baby. And the more that I write and the more that I tag and connect all these ideas, I'm so excited to see the little network. So that's super exciting. I also think that if we can understand, oh no, that's later. I'll talk about that later. But yes, the webs we create. This is a picture that I took on my walk the other night, and I just love that. I just think it looks so cool. And it reminds me of the little webs that I'm building with my ideas. How I'm teaching myself to connect them and to be able to hold them both at one time and realize that they're coming together as something decided and cohesive. Okay, where do I go? So, yes. So why do I like digital collage, and why do I feel like this has been a good outlet for me to explore visual literacy and try to train it into myself and try to train myself in visual literacy? Is because you get to make these visual connections. Whenever you put two images next to each other, they're kind of having a conversation with each other. And sometimes I make them more obvious than other times. And because I like the way that the images don't have any seams, like they don't have a background, they are just right next to each other. Some of the connections that you make are just functional, like two images are next to each other because you don't want a gap there and the image has to go somewhere and it's by another image that you intentionally want to connect to it. But some of them just on happenstance are next to each other because of the way the puzzle fits together. And that creates these sort of accidental connection of ideas. I kind of describe it as public transport, where everyone has their own motivations functionally for, ooh, I see a seam. Everyone has their own motivations functionally for being at the bus stop that day, and they might not even register that they're part of a bigger scene or a conversation or something interesting to look at or to understand, because they're just trying to get to work or get to a friend's house or get to church. And that's how I see the ideas. There's another seam. That's how I see the ideas that form quite naturally in these digital collages. And that's really exciting. And it's really fun to think about. It's really fun to make those connections myself. Let's see. Oh, speaking of film and film language, I relate digital collage and I guess sort of collage in general to montage, where you're making a story and informing the viewer of something and imbuing images collectively with more meaning than they had on their own because of the context in which they're in the montage. And I think digital collage is just like that. This image probably means something different to you, but for me, in the context of this collage, this image is supposed to represent harm reduction. The fact that I'm using digital collage as an alternative to other forms of hyper stimulating activity. Yes, so when I am crafting a collage, I found it helpful to give myself some parameters, and I break them often, but I like having them in place because they give me a starting point and they give me a lot of direction. So one of the things is that I have to actually like the image. Let me talk about harm reduction first. So Pinterest hasn't felt correct in a minute. It used to be a wonderful access point to a lot of different exciting images and ideas, inspiration. I think it introduced me to a lot of different artists the more that I looked into them, but it hasn't felt right in a minute. And I describe it as, it feels as if it's a Where's Waldo game, but without Waldo there. So I'm exploring and it feels like I'm exploring, it feels like I'm learning, it feels like I'm discovering, but ultimately there's no goal. What I'm looking for almost doesn't exist. In that way, it feels like a compression of ideas because I'm just loading pins into a board without even the intention of referencing them again, even though in my mind I'm like, oh, I'll look at this later. I'm not intending to really reference them again. I also feel like there's a lack of sources on Pinterest, which makes it incredibly frustrating because I feel like the context of any interesting piece that I see on there feels stripped away from it. And also an influx of AI generative generative AI images, AI generated images is disconcerting and doesn't feel particularly helpful for me in my process. This is actually a artist's rendering of an AI generated image that Royksopp used for one of their album covers. I still don't like it. I still would have liked to see what this artist would come up with through their own devices, with their own imagination. But I thought that was sort of an interesting image. Pinterest also feels like you're accepting an image, whether or not you like it, just because it's available or just because it's close enough to what you're looking for or what you're interested in. So it does feel like this sort of sad, it doesn't feel decisive. It doesn't feel like it's encouraging me to curate or to make decisions on what I like, what I don't like, what is informing. That's a half thought. We're gonna drop that one. It also sometimes the way that ads are positioned in Pinterest and Instagram specifically, I think, actually with Pinterest specifically, even more so than Instagram, feels really nefarious. The way that the ads are intentionally supposed to look like other posts, I think psychologically is very weird and not good for my particular process of creating things and creativity, because to me it feels like if you were reading a book, like a narrative, something that somebody actually put time and effort into crafting, and then all of a sudden there's like a full page ad in it, or even if you were reading a book and the characters try to sell you something, almost like Truman Show. It's just very eerie, and I think that it's actually hurting my visual literacy, because if I see an ad and it's hard to distinguish it from the other images that I'm looking for creativity or for inspiration or for part of my creative process, and it's hard for me to distinguish them, I think I'm lacking in a little bit of visual literacy if I can't tell that something's trying to sell me something versus something else that I want to use for my own creative process. The way that I just can kind of illustrate this is it made me a little bit more critical about food photography, because there's always been something off to me about the conventions around food photography. And I think I've placed my finger on it. It's so phony. It's so weird to look at. The world in which these foods exist aren't the one that I live in. Like the way that the bread is sort of haphazardly thrown onto the tablecloth just so that the image feels fuller, or so that you, as somebody that might want to make this recipe or buy this soup or whatever, understands that you can eat it with bread. It's trying to relate something to you or tell you something, but to me it's like the message is obscured. It's very weird and odd to look at. It's really uncomfortable. You know, croutons all over the counter, a full sprig of thyme in your soup, like a woody stem of thyme in your soup bowl is very bizarre, even if it's just trying to tell me that, you know, you're seasoning this soup with thyme. This is an insane image. How saturated it is, the saucy spoon on the counter. It's a really bizarre image the more that I look at it. And if it's going to be bizarre or it's going to be camp, I think it at least should intentionally be so, as opposed to just following, you know, these conventions of food photography that we've set up over time without even questioning, like, why are we doing this? Does it really make the image more interesting that we have the parsley that goes on the food kind of haphazardly strewn about on the counter? The way I actually don't really mind this image of these cabbage rolls, but the way that it's like they've taken the picture directly above the food to make it this perfect circle isn't the way that I experience plates in real life. Like, plates are always oval because of the way that I'm looking at them. Does that make sense? I don't know. All this to say, it's making me take a closer look. Also, a slice, like a wheel of lime in the soup is diabolical. This is crazy. But I understand this image as a product of, recipe development, food photography conventions. I am losing sunlight. Okay, let's zoom through. So I put parameters on myself for these digital collages just because I think they help inspire me to actually create them. And my little parameters are sort of an antidote to the self-doubt that I sometimes feel when I'm approaching a project or I'm trying to create something. So one of those parameters is I just have to like the image, and it has to in some way inform the idea that I'm trying to get across. So if I searched pop star, both of these images would come up, but one of them is the one that I'm actually trying to express, or the idea that I have of a pop star. I also just can't take too much time. There is a point where you've just searched for so long for an image that is conjuring up the idea that you want before it's just like you're just scrolling at that point and you're not even thinking about connecting ideas, for me personally. So I just put a time limit on myself for how long I'm actually willing to look for an image before at some point you just have to create the image yourself, even if it's just a little drawing. I think that digital collage, let's keep going. I don't want the seams, right? I want it to be very seamless. I don't really like it when there's a transparent background behind it, or you can see, a blocked color background behind it. Unless it's like a functional collage, which I do make and I love, like this one on my desktop, where it's more of a to-do list. I really don't like backgrounds. I think that it's actually more interesting when these images naturally butt up against other images and have these little conversations that you can find. I also reduce the amount of written word, especially English language, in my collages, because to be able to read them from however large the collage becomes, you have to consciously scale them so that you can read them. And I think it fucks up or it messes up the composition a lot of times. So I try to avoid that. I also have yet to instill this, but I want to start creating more of the images. So in this image in particular, I've personally produced like 10% of the images, and I'd like to get it more to like a 50% spot. But that's going to be more effort and more work, which I'm excited about. But yes, digital collage has helped. It is a practice that I feel is expansive rather than compressive or constricting, because I feel like the more that ideas connect to each other and have these relationships and these personal relationships, the ones that I have decided how they're having a conversation, how they're related, how they create more meaning between the two of them, it feels like my ideas are blooming, are getting bigger, are becoming larger, are almost endless, rather than how I felt while using Pinterest and how I feel while using Instagram, where it feels like my ideas are compressing, are becoming smaller, are becoming, I'm putting weird restrictions on my own ideas. I also love marrying this practice to my newfound love of mnemonic codes and mind palaces, and trying to really develop my memory in a new way. I feel like digital collage and the pursuit of better visual literacy totally goes hand in hand with my pursuit of a better functioning memory. The other thing I want to say, I've already touched on this, but like if Medium is indeed the message, something that I'm also addicted to, which is spreadsheets. Like I love spreadsheets as a medium, but whenever you're looking at an entire list, like this is like a list of movies, even though the headers have genres or maybe broad categories of how I've categorized all these movies in a single column, relating one movie all the way to another movie far lower on the list, I think there's just, it's not as intuitive as if you can see it in the same image and understand why two images would be important to the concept that you're trying to convey, or the general tone or themes or thesis of the collage that you're making, if that makes any sense. Anything else I want to talk about? That pretty much covers it all. I would love for this to be a starting point in my exploration of visual literacy and my advocacy, we could say, for practicing digital collage and using it as a form of harm reduction if you indeed also struggle with your doom scrolling tendencies and you've realized that what you're really craving is expressions of creativity, developing different skills, honing different skills, making connections to different ideas, having your own ideas, sitting with your own ideas. I think that this could be a really fun thing for you as well. We have now run out of sunlight, so that is a wrap on this video. Goodbye.